The invisible wife's revenge. He betrayed her for a trophy wife, not knowing he was married to a treasure. Now he's watching her become everything he isn't. Welcome, everyone. Your support helps us create incredible stories like this. Before we dive in, please give this video a like, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Carter Thorne nervously adjusted the knot of his tuxedo, his eyes fixed on the woman on the stage of the grand ballroom. For a terrifying moment, he thought he was hallucinating. That couldn't be Eleanor. His Eleanor, the quiet wife he left at home every night to meet Amelia. But it was her, transformed, radiant. Ladies and gentlemen, her clear, confident voice echoed through the historic room. For years, I believed my purpose in life was to be a silent support for someone else's dreams. Carter felt cold sweat trickle down his forehead. Around him, the Los Angeles elite hung on her every word, mesmerized by a presence he had never known she possessed. How was the woman he considered a convenient but unremarkable accessory commanding the attention of CEOs, ministers, and business tycoons? When we build our self-worth on our own accomplishments and values, she continued, we become truly unbreakable. The deafening ovation that followed was like a slap of reality for Carter. He had lost more than a wife. He had lost a diamond while chasing after colored glass. And now, watching Eleanor being surrounded by the most powerful men in the city, offering her business cards and multi-million-dollar proposals, Carter understood the true dimension of his loss. The woman he thought was a burden had turned out to be the greatest treasure he would ever possess. But how did we get here? The answer lies 6 months in the past, in a locked drawer and a shattered heart. Part 1. The locked drawer. The reflection in the elevator mirror revealed the truth that Eleanor had tried to ignore for months. Her brown eyes, once bright like honey in the sun, now seemed dull and lost. Her hands trembled imperceptibly as she adjusted her pearl necklace, an anniversary gift Carter had given her 3 years ago, back when he still pretended she mattered. The office building in downtown New York was buzzing with the typical energy of a Thursday afternoon. Eleanor was there to retrieve some forgotten documents from the law firm, where she worked as a junior associate, a position Carter always belittled in social conversations. My wife helps with some minor legal stuff, he would say, as if she were an intern and not a professional with a law degree from Columbia. But today would be different. Today, she would finally confront the suspicions that had been eating away at her. Carter's phone had rung incessantly during dinner the night before. Each vibration was a stab to her already wounded heart. He would step out to answer, murmur hushed words, and return with that forced smile she knew so well. Work, he would lie. Always work. Eleanor took a deep breath and stepped out of the elevator on the 12th floor. Carter's office, as the chief financial officer of a global consulting firm, was at the end of the hall. The glass walls offered a clear view inside, but she knew he would be in a meeting until 6. That's what she was counting on. His secretary, Mrs. Dubois, a 60-year-old woman with impeccably styled gray hair, looked up as Eleanor approached. Bonjour, Mrs. Thorne. Mr. Thorne is in a meeting with the German partners. I know, Eleanor replied, forcing a smile. I just came to get some documents I forgot in his office yesterday. It'll only take a minute. The lie came with surprising ease. Mrs. Dubois nodded, accustomed to the boss's wife's occasional appearances. Carter's office smelled of his expensive cologne, mixed with the scent of imported leather furniture. Eleanor closed the door behind her and went straight to the desk. Her hands trembled as she opened the drawers, searching for any evidence that would confirm her worst fears. In the third drawer, hidden under a pile of financial reports, she found what she didn't want to find. Receipts for expensive restaurants for 2, hotel reservations in his name for a double occupancy, and photos. So many photos. The woman in the pictures was stunning, platinum blonde hair, eyes as blue as sapphires, a smile that radiated youth and confidence. She couldn't have been more than 20 feet in the photos. Carter was hugging her with an intimacy he hadn't shown to Eleanor in years. His eyes sparkled in a way she hadn't seen in a long time, at least not when he looked at her. "Merde," Eleanor murmured, feeling her world collapse around her. One of the photos showed the couple at a restaurant on Fifth Avenue, which she immediately recognized. It was where Carter had said he was having a business dinner last week. Another showed them in front of the Empire State Building, him kissing the young woman's forehead with a tenderness that broke Eleanor's heart into 1,000 pieces. But it was the last photo that completely destroyed her. Carter and his mistress were in a jewelry store, the young woman trying on a ring that looked like it was worth a fortune, the same ring Eleanor had seen charged to their joint credit card the week before. When she had asked about the purchase, Carter had lied blatantly, saying it was a business gift for an important client. Tears began to stream silently down her face as she flipped through the evidence of his deception. 5 years of marriage, 5 years of believing she was loved, that they were building something together, that their little arguments and differences were normal. 5 years of being an idiot. She heard footsteps in the hall and quickly put the photos and documents back in the drawer. She wiped her face with the back of her hand and took a deep breath, trying to compose herself. She couldn't let anyone see her like this. Not yet. "Eleanor," Carter's voice echoed down the hall. "Dubois said you were here." He appeared at the office door, impeccable in his custom-made navy blue suit. At 38, Carter Thorne was still a handsome man. His brown hair was always perfectly styled, his athletic physique maintained with regular tennis sessions at the club, and that natural charm that had won her over in college. But now, looking at him, Eleanor saw only deceit. "I came to get some papers I forgot." She lied again, holding up an empty folder she had grabbed from the desk. Carter frowned. "What papers? You weren't even here yesterday." Eleanor's heart raced, but she maintained her composure. "From the court hearing. I left it here on Monday, remember? When I came to meet you for lunch." He seemed to accept the explanation, but his eyes still showed suspicion. Carter had always been perceptive. It was one of his professional qualities, and also one of his most dangerous weapons. "How was the meeting?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "Productive. The German partners are interested in expanding operations into the U.S. market. That means more trips to Berlin in the coming months, more lies." Eleanor nodded, feigning interest, while internally planning her next steps. She could no longer live this charade. She could no longer pretend she didn't know, but she also couldn't confront him yet, not without a plan. "I'm going home to make dinner," she said, kissing him lightly on the cheek. The familiarity of the gesture made her feel sick. "I'll be home late tonight," Carter replied, without even really looking at her. "Business dinner. Of course, more work." Eleanor smiled sadly and left the office, waving goodbye to Mrs. Dubois with a polite nod. During the subway ride to their apartment, Eleanor looked out the window without really seeing the city landscape passing by. The city lights were beginning to turn on in the late afternoon, creating a romantic backdrop that contrasted cruelly with the storm in her heart. The apartment they shared was a renovated loft in an 18th century building, with exposed wooden beams and windows that looked out onto a small internal courtyard. Eleanor had fallen in love with that place when they moved in 2 years ago. She had imagined a lifetime there, children running in the halls, romantic dinners on the small balcony, growing old together within those historic walls. Now, all she saw was the loneliness that had gradually set in. The nights Carter spent working, the weekends he arranged last-minute commitments, the conversations that had become monosyllabic, the touches that had disappeared, the smiles that had become mechanical. She sank onto the brown leather sofa they had chosen together and finally allowed the tears to fall freely. She cried for the naive woman she had been. She cried for the shattered dreams. She cried for the humiliation of discovering she was just a burden in the life of the man she loved. But in the depths of that ocean of pain, something began to stir. A spark of anger, small at first, but it grew with every tear she shed. Carter Thorne had made a grave mistake. He had completely underestimated the woman he married. Eleanor Marie Dubois. Eleanor wasn't just a legal assistant. She had a law degree from Columbia, spoke 4 languages fluently, and had given up a promising career to support her husband's dreams. She had agreed to stay in the shadows, to be the perfect wife, the silent companion. But that would end today. She got up from the sofa, wiped her face, and went to the office she had set up in the guest room. She turned on her computer and started researching. If Carter wanted to play dirty, he was about to discover he had chosen the wrong opponent. The war was just beginning, and Eleanor Thorne was determined to win. What do you think Eleanor should do now? Should she confront Carter immediately, or should she make a plan for revenge? Share your opinion in the comments. Part 2. The Silent Strategist. 3 weeks had passed since the devastating discovery, and Eleanor had transformed into a silent strategist. By day, she maintained the facade of a devoted wife, but on the nights Carter worked late, she immersed herself in a world of possibilities she had forgotten existed. Her first stop had been the office of Maria Reynolds, her former business law professor at Columbia, now a partner at one of the most prestigious law firms in New York. Maria had been Eleanor's mentor during university, and had always regretted when the talented young woman decided to take a career break after getting married. "Eleanor, ma chérie," Maria said, squeezing her hands across the polished mahogany table in her office. In her late 50s, she was the perfect example of elegance and female power. Her gray hair was impeccably cut into a bob that framed her face, and the Chanel suit she wore cost more than Eleanor's monthly salary. "I always knew you'd come back. A mind like yours can't stay dormant forever." "I need financial independence first," Eleanor had said, her voice firmer than she felt. "And I need to do this without my husband knowing. At least for now." Maria had smiled, a smile that mixed understanding with approval. Powerful women recognized each other, even when one of them was temporarily eclipsed. "I have exactly what you need," the lawyer replied. "An American client is looking for legal consulting to expand their business in the U.S. The work can be done remotely. The meetings are by video conference, and the pay is substantial." Now, sitting at her makeshift desk in the guest room, Eleanor was reviewing the contract she had just finalized. In 3 weeks, she had earned more money than she had in 6 months as a legal assistant. Her expertise in international law and her command of languages, which Carter had always minimized, were exactly what multinational companies were looking for. The phone rang. It was Carter, as usual. "Darling, I'll be late again tonight. The Germans scheduled a video conference for after hours." Eleanor looked at her computer screen, where Carter's calendar was open. She had hacked his accounts in the first week after the discovery. After all, he used the same password for everything, the birth date of his mistress. "Of course, mon amour," she replied sweetly. "Don't worry about me." There was no video conference scheduled. What there was a reservation at the Four Seasons for 2 people at 8 o'clock. The same restaurant where he had taken his mistress the week before. After hanging up, Eleanor continued her work. The case she was working on involved the acquisition of a small winery in the Hudson Valley by a Californian company. It was complex, challenging, and for the first time in years, she felt intellectually stimulated. Her thoughts were interrupted by a call from an unknown number. "Mrs. Thorne, this is Frank Miller, from Miller & Associates. Mrs. Reynolds gave me your contact. We have a proposal that might interest you." An hour later, Eleanor hung up the phone with a smile on her face. Frank Miller represented a consortium of European companies that needed legal consulting for a complex merger. The project would last 6 months, and the payment would be enough to guarantee her complete financial independence. But more important than the money was the feeling of being back in control. For years, she had allowed herself to be defined by her relationship with Carter. She was the wife of, the partner of, never Eleanor on her own. Now she was rediscovering who she really was when she wasn't living in someone else's shadow. She decided to go out and buy ingredients for dinner, a dinner she would eat alone, like so many others recently. As she walked the narrow streets of the Upper East Side, she watched her reflection in the boutique windows. Something had changed. Her shoulders were straighter, her step more determined. For the first time in months, she didn't feel small. At the bakery on the corner, she ran into Isabel, a neighbor she had become friends with over the years. "Eleanor, you look so radiant today," Isabel exclaimed, a plastic artist in her 40s who lived alone by choice. "Are you doing something different? New haircut?" Eleanor smiled. "Maybe it's just the change of season." "No, ma chérie, it's more than that. You're glowing." During the conversation, Isabel casually mentioned that she had seen Carter a few days ago on Roosevelt Island, accompanied by a very pretty young blonde. The comment was made without malice. Isabel didn't know about Eleanor's marital situation, but every word was like salt in the wound. "Probably a client," Eleanor replied, maintaining her forced smile. "Ah, yes, of course," Isabel agreed, although her tone suggested she hadn't believed the explanation. Back at the apartment, Eleanor prepared an elaborate dinner for one. Grilled salmon with seasonal vegetables, accompanied by a glass of Sancerre she had bought to silently celebrate her recent professional successes. While she ate, she browsed a catalog of graduate courses from Columbia University. She had always dreamed of getting a master's degree in international law, but Carter had discouraged the idea. "Why waste time and money on more studies?" he would say. "You already have a stable job." As if stability were all a woman should aspire to. Now, with the income from her consulting work, she could not only pay for the course, but also have money left over to invest in herself in other ways. She decided she would apply that very week. Around 10 at night, she heard the key in the lock. Carter came in with that staged expression of exhaustion he had perfected in recent months. "How was dinner with the Germans?" she asked, testing how far he would take the lie. "Productive, but exhausting. You know how those international negotiations are." Eleanor nodded understandingly, while internally planning how she would use the information she had gathered about Carter's real activities that night. "There's one thing I need to tell you," he said, sitting down next to her on the sofa. For a moment, Eleanor's heart raced. Was it possible he would finally confess? "I'll need to travel to Berlin next week. 5 days, maybe a whole week. The Germans want to finalize some details in person." Eleanor knew there was no trip to Berlin scheduled. Carter probably planned to spend an entire week with his mistress at some romantic resort, while she believed he was working. "That's a shame," she said, kissing him on the cheek. "I'll miss you." Later, lying in bed next to her deeply sleeping husband, probably exhausted from lying, Eleanor stared at the ceiling and made plans. Carter's trip would be the perfect opportunity to take the next step in her transformation. She had scheduled an appointment with a personal stylist, recommended by Maria. It was time to invest in her appearance, not to win Carter back. That bridge had been burned for good, but to reflect on the outside the powerful woman she was rediscovering on the inside. She had also decided to accept the invitation Maria had made the previous week to attend a charity event organized by the New York elite. For years, Eleanor had avoided such events, feeling inadequate, as if she didn't belong in that world. Now, she understood that the problem had never been her inadequacy, but rather the way Carter had undermined her self-confidence. As she silently planned her resurrection, Eleanor smiled in the dark. Carter thought he had everything under control, that he had managed to keep his double life a perfect secret. He had no idea that the woman he despised was preparing for a battle he didn't even know had begun. The war wouldn't be fought with tears or pleas, but with elegance, intelligence, and above all, with the most powerful weapon a woman can have: the certainty of her own self-worth. Can a person truly change for the better out of spite? And what do you think is the sweetest revenge? Tell us your thoughts in the comments. Part 3. The Resurrection. Bergdorf Goodman had never seemed so intimidating. Eleanor stopped at the main entrance, observing the stunning window displays, and feeling a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Sophie Dubois, the personal stylist recommended by Maria, had suggested they meet there for a complete makeover, as she had said with enthusiasm during their phone call. Madame Thorne, a stylish woman of about 40, approached, her perfectly wavy red hair framing a face that radiated professional confidence. "I'm Sophie, ready to discover the new Eleanor?" Over the next 4 hours, Eleanor had an experience she would never forget. Sophie wasn't just a stylist. She was a kind of self-esteem archaeologist, excavating layers of insecurity that Carter had deposited on her over the years. "Stop hiding behind clothes that are too big," Sophie said as she selected pieces. "You have a beautiful body. Why are you disguising it?" The first stop was lingerie. Eleanor had always bought practical, comfortable, and bland pieces. Sophie guided her to the La Perla section, where sets that cost more than her weekly salary hung like works of art. "The right lingerie isn't for showing anyone," Sophie explained, holding up a set of French lace in a nude tone. "It's to remind yourself that you are a powerful and sensual woman, even when no one is watching." In the dressing room, Eleanor looked at her reflection and almost didn't recognize herself. The lace perfectly embraced her curves, highlighting the slender waist she had forgotten she possessed, and enhancing the bust she had always hidden under loose blouses. "Mon Dieu," she murmured, running her hands over the silhouette that was revealed. "Exactly," Sophie said from outside. "Now let's build the rest of the armor." Custom-tailored dresses that hugged every curve without being vulgar, dresses that turned business meetings into fashion shows, coats that added drama and sophistication to any look. Sophie had a keen eye for colors and textures that complemented Eleanor's warm skin tone and made her brown eyes sparkle like topazes. "You always dressed to be invisible," Sophie observed, as Eleanor tried on a navy blue midi dress that cost a small fortune. "It's time to dress to be unforgettable." The transformation didn't stop at clothes. Sophie took her to the salon of Jean-Claude Beguin, where the most sought-after hairdresser in New York was waiting. "Let's reveal your cheekbones," Henri, the hairdresser, said, studying Eleanor's reflection in the mirror. "That cut you have is hiding your entire facial structure." 3 hours later, Eleanor emerged from the salon with a modern bob that perfectly framed her face, highlighting her almond-shaped eyes and the facial bones she had never realized she possessed. The color had been refined to a chocolate brown, with golden highlights that magically caught the light. The last stop was at Sephora, where a professional makeup artist taught Eleanor techniques to enhance her natural beauty without exaggeration. "You have beautiful eyes," the makeup artist said, applying a subtle shadow that made them look bigger and more expressive. "Why do you hide them behind those big glasses?" "Nearsightedness," Eleanor replied. "Have you ever thought about contact lenses or glasses that complement your face instead of dominating it?" At the optical shop next door, Eleanor tried on delicate frames that completely transformed her appearance. The thick, bland glasses she had worn for years were replaced by a discreet Italian frame that added sophistication instead of hiding her beauty. When she finally got home late that afternoon, carrying shopping bags that represented a considerable investment in herself, Eleanor could barely believe the reflection that greeted her in the entrance hall mirror. The woman looking back at her was elegant, confident, stunning. It was her, but a version she had forgotten existed. or perhaps a version she had never allowed to exist. Carter came home 2 hours later, as always claiming to have been stuck in meetings. When he saw her, he stopped in the middle of the living room with a confused expression. "You." He changed his hair, he said, unable to hide his surprise. "Do you like it?" she asked, feigning casualness as she ran a hand through her silky hair. He hesitated. For years, he had made subtle comments that undermined Eleanor's self-confidence, suggesting she was letting herself go, unfavorably comparing her to other women, and making jokes about her overly practical style. Now, confronted with a transformed version of his wife, he seemed lost. "It's different," he finally said. "Different how?" she insisted. "I don't know. Just different?" Eleanor smiled. Carter's inability to express approval or admiration said everything about the state of their marriage. When a man truly loves a woman, he celebrates her beauty. He doesn't feel threatened by it. During dinner, she noticed him discreetly watching her, as if trying to understand what had changed beyond her appearance. Because in fact, much more than just clothes and hair was transforming. "Oh, I forgot to tell you," she said casually as they served dessert. "I accepted a consulting project for an American company. It's going to keep me busy a few nights a week." Carter frowned. "What kind of consulting?" "International law, mergers and acquisitions." She kept her tone light, as if she were talking about the weather. "You didn't tell me anything about it." "You don't tell me about all your work projects either," she replied, meeting his eyes for the first time in weeks. "I thought we had established that each of us handles our own professional matters." It was a subtle provocation, a reference to the many times he had dodged questions about his business dinners and late meetings. Carter seemed to get the hint, but didn't say anything. That night, while he slept, Eleanor worked on her laptop in the guest room. The project for the European consortium was progressing well, and she had received effusive praise from Frank Miller about the quality of her work. "Mrs. Thorne," he had said during their afternoon call, "your report on the fiscal implications of the merger is brilliant. Where have you been hiding all these years? Hiding behind a husband who treated her like an accessory," she thought, but replied only, "Sometimes we need the right moment to shine." Around 2 a.m, she received an email that made her heart race. Maria Reynolds was inviting her to be a keynote speaker at a seminar on international business law next week. The event would bring together the top names in the New York legal sector, and her participation would be widely publicized in specialized media. "Eleanor, ma chérie," the email read, "it's time for you to return to your rightful place in the legal world. Your expertise is exactly what we need for this panel on the future of transnational mergers in the European Union." Without hesitation, she replied, accepting the invitation. It was time to step out of the shadows for good. As she typed her response, she heard Carter stirring in bed. He had woken up and probably noticed her absence. She saved her work and went to the bedroom, finding him sitting up in bed with a confused look. "Where were you?" he asked. "Finishing up some reports," she replied, taking off her robe and revealing the new lingerie she had bought. She wasn't trying to seduce him. That phase was over, but she wanted to see his reaction. Carter looked at her with an expression she couldn't decipher. Desire? Confusion? Suspicion? Perhaps all of them mixed together. "You really are different," he said, pulling her close. For a moment, Eleanor wondered if the external transformation could reignite something in their marriage. But then she remembered the photos hidden in his drawer, the lying dinners, the young blonde woman who was trying on expensive rings paid for with their joint money. She let him embrace her, but her heart remained closed. Carter had lost the right to true intimacy the moment he decided to look for what he had at home in another woman. "Good night, darling," she murmured, pretending to be sleepy. But sleep was far away. Her mind was buzzing with plans, strategies, and possibilities. The transformation had begun, but there was still a lot of work ahead. In 1 week, she would be on stage at one of the most important events in the New York legal sector. Carter would be shocked to discover that his little legal assistant was, in fact, a recognized expert in international law. The sweetest revenge wouldn't be to destroy him, but to show him exactly what he had lost. And from then on, he would be the one living in her shadow. What do you think is the sweetest revenge? And what do you think will happen when Carter discovers the truth? Leave your opinion in the comments. Part 4. The Showdown. The Plaza Hotel had never witnessed a transformation as dramatic as the one that was about to happen. Eleanor adjusted the cuffs of her navy blue Armani blazer, which she had chosen especially for that day. The day she would definitively stop being the invisible wife of Carter Thorne and become Eleanor Thorne. International law expert. The seminar on mergers and acquisitions in the new global economy had attracted the top names in the European and American legal and business sectors. Maria had made sure to position Eleanor as the main speaker on the event's most anticipated panel, and the specialized press had already begun to publicize the participation of the renowned consultant, who was discreetly working with major American corporations. 3 hours before the event, Eleanor was in the hotel room she had booked to prepare, away from curious eyes and domestic distractions. Her presentation was polished down to the last detail, the result of weeks of intensive research and meticulous preparation. The phone rang. It was Carter. "Where are you? I left the office early and you weren't home." "I have a professional engagement today," she replied, applying the last touch of red lipstick she had strategically chosen, a color that conveyed power and confidence. "What engagement? You didn't tell me anything." Eleanor smiled at the mirror. "You don't tell me about all your engagements either, darling." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Carter was clearly not used to having his own tactics used against him. "When are you coming back?" "Late. Don't wait up for me." She hung up before he could ask more questions. It was time to focus on what really mattered. At 7 o'clock that evening, the main hall of the Plaza Hotel was packed. Eleanor discreetly watched the audience from the makeshift backstage, recognizing famous faces from the New York legal world, directors of major corporations, and even some influential politicians. Among them, to her surprise, was Carter. He had arrived with some colleagues from his office, probably attracted by the event's reputation in business circles. Eleanor smiled ironically. Carter had no idea what a spectacle he was about to witness. "Eleanor, ma chérie, you look radiant," Maria exclaimed, approaching with her usual elegance. "Ready to make an impact?" "More than ready," Eleanor replied, feeling a strange calm take over her body. It was the serenity of someone who was finally in the right place. The event's moderator, Jean-Philippe Durand, a renowned financial journalist, made the initial introductions of the speakers. When it was Eleanor's turn, his words echoed through the hall like music to her ears. "Our next speaker needs no introduction to anyone who has been following the major international mergers of the past few months. Eleanor Thorne has been the legal mind behind some of the most complex and successful operations involving European and American companies. Her expertise in international law and command of multiple jurisdictions have made her one of the most sought-after consultants in the current market." Eleanor walked onto the stage with firm steps. The sound of her Louboutin heels echoed in the reverent silence of the auditorium. When she reached the podium and looked out at the audience, her eyes met Carter's. The look of absolute shock on his face was worth every moment of humiliation she had endured. "Bonsoir, mesdames et messieurs," she began, her clear and confident voice filling the hall. "Tonight, I would like to share with you not only legal strategies for navigating the complexities of transnational mergers, but also a reflection on how true power is born from the ability to reinvent oneself. For 45 minutes, Eleanor commanded the absolute attention of the audience. She spoke with authority about complex cases, cited international legal precedents, and presented analyses that left even the most experienced experts impressed. It wasn't just her knowledge that captivated them, but the way she presented it, with passion, clarity, and a confidence that seemed to radiate from her every pore. "A successful merger," she said at a particularly powerful moment in her presentation, "doesn't just happen between companies but within ourselves. When we can merge our technical expertise with our emotional intuition, our past experience with our future vision, we create something much more powerful than the sum of our individual parts." The audience was mesmerized. Eleanor could see executives furiously taking notes, lawyers nodding in approval, and journalists capturing every word. When she finished, the ovation was deafening. People stood up spontaneously, applauding not only her presentation, but clearly recognizing that they were witnessing the birth of a new star in the international legal world. During the question and answer session, the questions were sophisticated and challenging, but Eleanor navigated them with the dexterity of a veteran. A question about ethics in hostile takeovers led her to a reflection on loyalty and betrayal that particularly resonated with her personal experience. "Trust," she said, looking directly at Carter in the audience, "is the most valuable asset in any relationship, whether business or personal. When it is broken, the consequences rarely are limited to the parties directly involved. An entire structure can collapse, creating opportunities for new players to assume positions of leadership." After the presentation, Eleanor was surrounded by executives, lawyers, and journalists. Business cards were exchanged, invitations for projects were made, and collaboration proposals came in by the minute. It was as if a floodgate had opened, releasing all the opportunities that had been waiting for her. "Madame Thorne," a distinguished man of about 60 said, "we have offices in London, New York, and Tokyo, and we are looking for exactly someone with your profile to lead our European International Mergers Division." Another executive approached. "Catherine Beaumont, from Credit Lyonnais. We need to talk about consulting for our International Investment Department." The offers kept coming, each one more attractive than the last. In a single night, Eleanor had become one of the most coveted professionals in New York. On the other side of the hall, she could see Carter trying to approach, but being constantly intercepted by the crowd of people who wanted to talk to her. The irony was delicious. For the first time in years, he was the one trying to get her attention, not the other way around. When he finally managed to get close, it was almost midnight. Most of the guests had left, but Eleanor was still talking to Maria and some of the most important executives present. "Eleanor," Carter said, his voice filled with confusion and something that could have been admiration. "I didn't know you." "That I what?" she asked, interrupting him. "That I was capable, that I had talent, that I could shine if I had the opportunity?" He was speechless, clearly struggling to process the transformation of the woman he thought he knew. "We need to talk," he finally said. "We do," she agreed, "but not today. Today is my night." Maria approached, interrupting the tense moment. "Eleanor, ma chérie, the New York Times wants to do a feature on you next week, and the International Association of Business Lawyers is interested in inviting you to the board of directors." Carter watched the scene with an increasingly somber expression. The woman he had kept in the shadows was not only emerging into the light, but was becoming a star, brighter than he would ever be. "Carter," Eleanor said, turning to him with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I hope you enjoyed the presentation. It was just the beginning." He tried to smile, but the result was more of a grimace. "You completely surprised me." "I imagined so," she replied. "Sometimes the people we think we know have much more to show than we expect." The phrase was loaded with a double meaning, and Carter seemed to catch the insinuation. For a moment, their eyes met, and a silent communication passed between them. He knew that she knew, and she knew that he knew that she knew. "I'm going home," he finally said. "I'll stay a little longer," Eleanor replied. "I have some important contacts to make." As Carter walked away, crestfallen and clearly shaken, Eleanor turned back to the group of executives still surrounding her. For the first time in years, she felt exactly where she belonged, at the center of attention, being valued for her intelligence and competence. The night had been more than a professional success. It had been a declaration of independence, a manifesto of self-worth, and the first public act of a new Eleanor Thorne. Carter had spent years making her believe she was lucky to have him. Now, as she looked at the dozens of professional proposals accumulating in her purse, she understood the truth. He was the one who had been lucky to have her, and that luck had run out. What would you have done in Carter's place, and do you think he deserves to be forgiven? Tell us your thoughts below. Final act. The Phoenix rises. 6 months after the seminar that changed her life, Eleanor was sitting in her new office with a privileged view of Central Park. The plaque on the glass door read, "Eleanor Thorne, CEO, Thorne, International Legal Consulting." The last name that had once represented her imprisonment now symbolized her conquest. She had chosen to keep it not out of nostalgia, but as a daily reminder of her transformation. Eleanor adjusted her Cartier glasses, a delicate frame that enhanced her almond-shaped eyes, and reviewed the impressive numbers in her company's annual report. In just 2 years, her consulting firm had become one of the most respected in America, with offices in London, Brussels, and soon, New York. Her 42 employees were carefully selected not only for their technical competence, but for sharing her values of excellence and integrity. Camilla, her executive assistant who had grown with the company, knocked discreetly on the door. "Mrs. Thorne, the confirmation has arrived. The State Department has officially named you to lead the American delegation at the International Commercial Law Conference in Geneva." Eleanor smiled. Representing the U.S. at such an important conference was the ultimate recognition of her expertise. The shy girl who once apologized for existing would now be her country's spokesperson on international legal issues. "And there's one more thing," Camilla continued, her eyes twinkling with curiosity. "A very interesting invitation has arrived." She handed her a heavy envelope with letterhead that Eleanor immediately recognized. It was from the firm where Carter worked, or rather, had worked until 6 months ago, before the company drastically cut costs and laid off several employees deemed redundant. The invitation was for Mr. Henderson's retirement party, the senior partner who had always admired Eleanor's work at the rare social events she attended as Carter's wife. The irony was delicious. She was being invited as a guest of honor, while Carter wasn't even on the guest list. "I'll accept," Eleanor said, handing back the invitation. "It will be interesting to see some familiar faces again." That afternoon, during her weekly Pilates session at the exclusive studio near Fifth Avenue, Eleanor reflected on how her life had changed in an almost surreal way. Every muscle in her body radiated strength and confidence gained through discipline and dedication. At 30, she was in better physical and emotional shape than she had ever been. Her instructor, Sylvie, a former dancer from the American Ballet Theater, always commented on the transformation she had witnessed. "When you first came here, you seemed to be hiding from your own body," Sylvie said, as she adjusted Eleanor's posture on the reformer. "Now you move like a woman who knows exactly who she is and what she wants." It was true. Eleanor had learned that confidence wasn't something you find, but something you build deliberately, day by day, choice by choice. Every no she said to projects that didn't inspire her, every yes to challenging opportunities, every moment she chose her own approval over that of others. All of this had woven the fabric of her new identity. On the way back home, a stunning penthouse she had bought outright, with the profits from the company's first year, Eleanor stopped at Café de Flore, where she used to go to work in the first months after her divorce. It was her ritual of gratitude, a way of reminding herself of where her journey of rebuilding had begun. The waiter, Pierre, who had known her since the days she arrived with red eyes from crying, always greeted her with a warm smile. "Mrs. Thorne, I read about you in the New York Times last week. The lawyer who is redefining international law." At her usual table, while sipping her café au lait and watching the typical afternoon bustle of New York, Eleanor flipped through the agenda on her iPad. Business dinner with Swiss investors on Tuesday. Lecture at NYU on Wednesday. Meeting with the editorial board of the Harvard Business Review on Thursday. They wanted her to write an article about female leadership in the 21st century. And on the weekend, the opening of Isabel's exhibition, her artist neighbor, who had become one of her closest friends. Her life was full, rich, and meaningful. There was no empty space left by Carter that needed to be filled by someone else. She had discovered that completeness came from within, not from outside. The phone rang. It was Maria, her mentor, and now one of her dearest friends. "But chérie, I have something funny to tell you. You know my firm is handling the divorce of the wife of the Société Générale director." Eleanor murmured, dividing her attention between the conversation and the emails that kept pouring in. "Well, it seems she hired a private investigator and discovered that her husband has had a mistress for 2 years, a young woman in her 20s, who works as a model." Eleanor frowned. Something in the story sounded familiar. "The interesting thing is the girl's name," Maria continued with a playful tone. "Amelia Dubois, and from what the investigation revealed, she has a pattern. She always gets involved with successful married men. Apparently, her last victim was a certain Carter Thorne." Eleanor almost dropped her coffee cup. Amelia had done to Carter exactly what she had done to her. She had used him as long as it suited her, and then moved on to a more valuable prize. The poetic justice of the situation was almost comical. "Are you still there?" Maria asked. "I am," Eleanor replied, surprised to realize she felt only a slight amusement at the news. No resentment or malicious satisfaction. It was like hearing about people she had known in a past life. "It's an interesting story, but it no longer affects me." And it was true. Carter and his problems belonged to a chapter of her life that was definitively closed. That night, in her penthouse, Eleanor prepared a sophisticated dinner for one. Herb-crusted salmon, accompanied by a premier cru Chablis she had discovered on a recent trip to Burgundy. As she enjoyed the meal on the balcony with a view of the Empire State Building, she reflected on the extraordinary journey she had taken. 2 years ago, she thought she needed a man to feel complete. Now she understood that completeness was an internal job, a daily construction of self-worth and purpose. She had had some romantic dates in recent months, a charming doctor she met at a conference, an Italian businessman who courted her after a meeting in Milan. But none had sparked enough interest to interrupt the romance she was living with herself. "Maybe one day," she murmured to the city lights that stretched before her, "but only if someone adds value to the incredible life I've already built on my own." The intercom rang. It was the doorman, announcing a flower delivery. Eleanor frowned. She wasn't expecting anything. When she opened the door, she found a luxurious arrangement of white orchids, her favorite flowers, accompanied by a card. "Congratulations on the Geneva nomination. You were always destined for greatness. An admirer who recognizes your worth." There was no signature, but Eleanor suspected who it might be. In recent months, she had received some subtle signs that Carter was trying to reconnect. A discreet congratulations on LinkedIn when she was named to the board of the Franco-American Chamber of Commerce. A polite message on WhatsApp when Elle magazine named her one of the 50 most influential women in the country. Pathetic attempts to reconnect with a woman who had completely transcended his orbit. She placed the flowers in a baccarat crystal vase, a gift she had bought for herself after signing her biggest contract. And she smiled ironically. If they were really from Carter, they were yet another symbol of her transformation. The man who once brought her cheap flowers from the supermarket because he was walking by now sent expensive orchids as peace offerings. The following week, Mr. Henderson's retirement party was held at the Pavillon, one of the most elegant restaurants in New York. Eleanor arrived in a navy blue Chanel dress that cost more than Carter earned in a month at his new job as a freelance consultant. Her hair was impeccably styled in a low bun that highlighted the Mikimoto pearl necklace she had bought in Tokyo during a business trip. The reaction when she entered the room was immediate and gratifying. Conversation stopped mid-sentence, heads turned, and a murmur of recognition passed through the room. Mr. Henderson came over to greet her personally, introducing her to guests as one of the brightest legal minds of her generation. "Eleanor, ma chérie," he said, holding her hands with paternal affection. "I always knew you had extraordinary potential. I'm sorry it took the world so long to discover it." During the cocktail hour, Eleanor was surrounded by former colleagues, clients, and other guests who wanted to talk to the celebrity of the night. Her old assistant colleagues, who once saw her as one of them, now looked at her with a mix of admiration and poorly disguised envy. The partners who had barely noticed her presence at past social events now competed for her attention. It was while she was talking to a group of international lawyers that she saw him. Carter was in the opposite corner of the room, visibly uncomfortable in a tuxedo that had seen better days. He hadn't been officially invited, but had managed to get in by accompanying a former colleague who had pitied his situation. Their eyes met across the crowded room. For a moment, Eleanor saw in them the same expression she had witnessed at the Plaza Hotel 2 years earlier: regret, admiration, and the painful understanding of what he had lost. She gave him a polite nod, a civil courtesy, and continued her conversation about the new European Union regulations for transnational mergers. Carter was part of her history, but not her current reality. Later, as the party was ending, he finally mustered the courage to approach her. "Eleanor," he said, his voice hesitant. You were incredible, as always." "Thank you, Carter." She kept her tone cordial, but distant. "How are you?" "Well, working hard. Building my own consulting firm, you know how it is." She knew he was lying. Through her contacts in the New York legal scene, she knew Carter was struggling to get clients, and that his reputation had been tarnished not only by his scandalous divorce, but by some questionable professional decisions he had made under pressure. "I heard you're going to lead the U.S. delegation in Geneva," he continued. "You must be very proud." "I am," she replied simply. There was an awkward silence between them, filled with unsaid words and lost opportunities. "Eleanor, he began, then stopped. "I want you to know that I recognize what I did, how wrong I was about everything." She studied him for a moment, seeing not the powerful and confident man she had once admired, but someone diminished by his own choices. "I know you recognize it," she said gently. "But that doesn't change anything, Carter. You did me a favor, even without knowing it. You forced me to discover who I really was when I wasn't trying to be who you wanted me to be. But if I could go back, you can't. And I wouldn't want you to." Her voice was firm, but not cruel. "I am happy, Carter. Truly happy. And you also deserve to find your own happiness without trying to rebuild something that should never have existed the way it did." He nodded slowly, finally understanding that this conversation wasn't a second chance, but a definitive closure. "You were always too special for me," he said with painful honesty. "No," Eleanor corrected him. "I was always special. You just never knew how to recognize it. As she walked away, leaving Carter alone in the emptying room, Eleanor felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in years. The last chapter of her old life had finally closed. Outside the restaurant, New York sparkled in the night light. Eleanor took a deep breath of the fresh spring air and smiled at the stars beginning to appear in the clear sky. She had lost a husband, but gained a whole world of possibilities. She had traded a small life for a grand existence, and most importantly, she had discovered that the most important person to love and value in her life was herself. At 30 years, Eleanor Thorne was not just a successful woman. She was a complete, fulfilled, and invincible woman, and her story was just beginning. As she hailed a taxi to go home, to her penthouse, to her extraordinary life, Eleanor smiled with the certainty that she had become exactly who she was always meant to be. Not someone's shadow, but the main light of her own existence. The woman who had risen from the ashes was not only stronger than before, she was finally free. What do you think of Eleanor's final conversation with Carter? Was she too hard on him, or did he get exactly what he deserved? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more amazing stories.